Chapter 6. Riots and Revolution. Your republic will be fearfully plundered and laid waste by barbarians in the 20th century, as the Roman Empire was in the 5th, with this difference that the Huns and Vandals will have been engendered within your own country, by your own institutions. British historian Lord Macaulay. The communists can start revolutions at any distance and on any sphere. However, they must have a border entrance for their agents and military enforcements to enter. Without a military access to a nation from the outside, the cause of the revolution is doomed. Today they have an access to this nation through Cuba 90 miles away. The geographical preparations for an American revolution have been accomplished. The communists now labor for an internal overthrow of this country through revolutionaries in every major city. Kenneth Goff, who once labored for this communist revolution, now exposes the plans of this movement throughout schools, churches, and newspapers. He said 1.5 billion human beings are under communist control. 1/3 of the Earth's surface is under that control. Communism is shaking every orderly government and has reached into every nation, he added. He said he wrote 30 years ago that this country would see race riots, blackouts, demoralizing of youth, snipers, and life with infirm foundations. These are planned riots, he said. They will not stop but grow greater. He looks soon for 70 simultaneous riots, and this is the signal for a takeover of the nation. Anarchism is raging the streets of America, he said. It is not the local Negroes rioting, but a well-trained army of Negroes, students, liberal clergymen who are seemingly bent on moving into every community. He termed the riots a conspiracy. The Reverend Mr. Goff said the riots and war demonstrations are paid for and initiated by the Kremlin and Communist headquarters in Peking. He said China and Moscow are not at one another's throat. Wichita Eagle. October 29, 1967. The police and federal investigators are also well aware of the secret plots against America. It is no mere coincidence that most of the leaders in recent demonstrations either are or were members of the Communist Party or some revolutionary organization. Nor is it without significance that the pattern of agitation and action neatly conforms to procedures carried out by communists or revolutionaries elsewhere and at other times. Tom Fitzpatrick, director of San Francisco Police Department. Riots at the University of California in Berkeley were part of a testing operation in the communist program. The purpose of such rioting is to break down law and order, destroy principles, morals, and the society in general. In such a moral, legal, and lawful chaos, the communists organize and provide a restoration of dictatorship enforced by terror and the threat of death to all objectors. Eldridge Cleaver, a Black Panther leader, instigated several riots and demonstrations in this country. His tactics and activities were unlawful and subversive, so much so that he was under warrant for arrest, but he escaped and fled the country. He went to Cuba and then to Algiers. A reporter for True magazine had an interview with Cleaver while he was in Algiers. Later he told me of his plan to return in secret and go underground, as part of a frightening tactic in leading a bloody new revolution. Cleaver can hardly wait to come home, where he wants to foment revolution, lead guerrilla warfare, and take off the head of Senator McClellan. True, page 35, January 1970. Jerry Rubin announced that the Black Panthers had made Salt Lake City their headquarters and that Cleaver was now in hiding in Utah, boasting that the police could not find him. Another militant by the name of Stokely Carmichael, chairman of the misnamed Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, made this public statement. When you talk of Black Power, you talk of bringing this country to its knees. When you talk of Black Power, you talk of destroying everything in Western civilization. Statement made on August 4th in riot-torn Cleveland. 1. Negroes certainly see that this is the richest country in the world, and they want to share in the wealth. If Negroes cannot enjoy part of that dream, they're going to burn the country down too. We've got to let them, the white community, know that when they arrest one of us in our community, we're going to move to disrupt this whole country. 3. The question is whether or not this country is going to be able to meet their Negro needs peacefully, or whether they will have to move to disrupt this country in order to force the country to speak to their needs. 4. I don't think Black people ought to wait to get the vote. You ought to get together and tell the white man that if you don't get the vote, you're gonna burn down the city. Tell him if we don't get the vote, you're not gonna have a Washington, D.C. statement while addressing Negro residents in Anacostia. 5. The revolutionary takeover could come about by very simple means. The rioting in Watts began in just such a manner. On August 11, 1965, at 7:45 p.m., Highway Patrolman Lee Minicus made a routine drunk driving arrest involving 21-year-old Negro Marquette Fry. Within 3 hours, autos were turned over, some burned, drivers were stoned, kicked, and knifed. Soon 6,000 rioters kept the night sky blazing with fires. Several hundred stores worth millions of dollars were reduced to ashes. Fire and destruction spread over 20 square miles, while shouting and screaming mobs ravaged homes. Police and firemen were shot at by snipers. 1,000 firemen battled day and night for 5 days trying to control the holocausts. The dead and injured reached well over 1,000. It was an insurrection. Watts had been called a dress rehearsal for the future riots which were to come. The pattern of destruction in Detroit, Washington, Chicago, and Pennsylvania were all the same. Behind each disturbance is the hardcore insurrectionist who labors for a total revolution in America. A lesson that should be heeded by all Americans is that agitators were successful in creating race hatred in Los Angeles, a city that had never been segregated, a city where public facilities are open to all, where education from kindergarten through college is available for anyone willing to take advantage of it, where Negroes, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, Mexicans, and peoples of many other nationalities, races, and religions have worked side by side for decades. This is the city whose police department has won more major awards in the field of law enforcement than any other city in the country. This is where the worst race riot in the history of the United States took place. Civil Riots USA, page 19. Kill the White Devils. This African Negro is one of 20,000 innocent civilians brutally murdered by the White Devil soldiers. Now the white man's day is over. We will kill the white man. We will have the white women for our pleasure. We will smash out the brains of the white babies against the nearest tree. The time to begin is soon. Watch for the sign. Only through the world government can all Negroes find peace. Only through the world court can all Negroes find justice. Only through a world communism can all Negroes find equality. Only through bloodshed can all Negroes find freedom. Start a river of blood. Kill the white devils. The communist imprint of revolution was found all over the Watts area. After the rioting had subsided, pamphlets found on the streets left little doubt as to the cause of such a violent revolt. See sample on preceding page. While the fires of destruction were still smoldering, and the bodies of the dead were being hauled away, America was offering many opinions as to why these things had happened. The news reporters and the commentators spoke of civil rights, poverty, racism, and other social reasons, but very few ever mentioned communist influences. But the pattern, the programming, and the preparations are all the same in every riot. These disturbances were not planned in the year of the riots, but many years before. America is witnessing new elements of demonstrations: sit-ins, sleep-ins, shop-ins, lie-ins, and love-ins. All of these are enticing and inviting to the youth who venture into them for kicks. The psychology is to create a group unity in action. The movement may be simple and innocent to begin with, eventually moving into themes such as stop the war, police brutality, and civil rights, all of which soon evolve into civil riots. Demonstrators are soon led by agitators, and then the group becomes a mob from which a few bricks are thrown, and then a fire started. With the excitement and pitch moved up to looting and fighting, the innocent demonstration moves into violence and revolution. No one knows these plans better than a former communist. Revolution. It can happen here. What about Los Angeles, Chicago, Long Beach, New York City, San Diego, Bakersfield? Goff explains revolutionary strategy. Many people ask, is it really possible for the communists to take over America, and if so, how would they propose to do it? The answer is supplied by Kenneth Goff, a former communist, now an ardent anti-communist and freedom fighter. The following is taken from the book Confessions of Stalin's Agent by Dr. Kenneth Goff, published in 1948. There are more communists in America today than there were in Russia before the revolution and in Spain before their civil war. Since the so-called dissolution of the Comintern, party membership has increased by leaps and bounds. Following my induction into the Communist Party, I was sent to the Debs Labor School in Milwaukee. This was one of the many communist training centers operating in all parts of the United States. Such schools are usually located in thickly populated industrial sections. The largest one is in New York State. We received instructions every day on how to organize and promote the revolution, how to bore from within existing organizations and lead them toward the left. Gene Dennis told us one evening not to report to school the following day. but to wander around the downtown area of Milwaukee until we received further instructions. I went down to the main business section the next morning and did some window shopping. About 10 o'clock, while gazing in a window, a newsboy tapped me on the elbow and asked me if I wanted to buy a Milwaukee Sentinel. I said no, that I had already read it. He continued to insist that I purchase one, and I ordered him away. He then handed me a copy and said, "Read, comrade." I took the paper, and across the top was written in pencil, "Go to Buse Hall." I immediately went there and found many of the comrades had already arrived. More were coming in every minute. When assembled, we were told that if the party ever went underground, it would be necessary to meet this way. We were instructed how to dismantle and assemble mimeograph machines, to print handbills if the party was forced to operate secretly. Then Jean Dennis gave us the blueprint of how to seize a city when the revolution breaks. At that hour, large race riots are supposed to take place in every city of any size. Leaders of these mobs are to be carefully chosen and trained in advance to work on both sides. The disturbances are to be of some extent so as to require sending large forces of police to those areas. While the authorities are trying to quell these riots, picked bands of Reds are to seize the radio and TV stations and telephone exchanges. With the aid of their comrades, who are employed inside, all communication systems are to be instantly crippled or taken over. Flying squads of communists are to seize control of the water supply and shut it off, also the electrical power and gas. This means that no elevators or streetcars, subways or electric buses would be running. Other buses would be seized. Homes would be without water, fuel, light or telephone. It would be impossible to communicate with friends or loved ones, even in another part of the city. Goon squads of professional murderers would round up the people in the business districts. Men are to be held as hostages in some of the larger buildings. Women are to be turned over to the sex-crazed mobs unless the men surrender. These are exactly the methods used in Russia, Spain and other places where the Communist Party was allowed to organize and come to fruition. They expect to do the same thing in the United States. Bridges, subways and railroad stations are to be blown up and airports seized. Downtown areas are to be isolated from the rest of the city. Sharpshooters and snipers are to be detailed in taxicabs and private cars, which are to be taken over to wipe out the police, soldiers, uniformed persons and known vigilantes. Smoke bombs properly located in subways, buildings and large stores are to add to the terror of the people. When night comes, the city is to be in pitch darkness. Murderous bands of Reds will roam the streets, plundering shops and stores, and starting fires in old buildings. This will increase the panic and facilitate the surrender of men. Then, as the morning sun casts its first rays on the community, one will be able to see blood flowing in the streets. The following schemes were outlined as temporary targets and measures of expediency. 1. To completely saturate the public mind with Red propaganda, so there would be such confusion that the democratic system could not possibly operate. 2. To set up innumerable front organizations for smearing and ruining before the public every man or woman of prominence who dared raise a finger against us. 3. To promote pacifist groups and have them cry out against war in order to keep America disarmed while Russia prepared for world conquest. 4. To create unemployment in the United States by dumping products produced by slave labor on the markets of the world. 5. To create a general strike through communist-controlled labor unions, thereby paralyzing the nation and creating waves of mob violence. When William Z. Foster made his speech in May 1928, accepting the presidential nomination as candidate of the Communist Party, he said, "When a communist heads a government of the United States, and that day will come just as surely as the sun rises, that government will not be a capitalist government, but a Soviet government, and behind this government will stand the Red Army to enforce the dictatorship of the proletariat." This is a bold statement, but 100% true as far as Moscow's designs and Communist Party objectives are concerned. We were told that when the party came into power, a United States of Soviet America would be established. That this nation would be divided into Soviets with a commissar over each one. When such statements were made in our meetings, it was a habit for all of us to rise with clenched fists and sing lustily. We marched down the streets with our banner unfurled, fighting for bread in the communist world. The bosses all quake at the challenge we hurl. Advance to the USSA. One comrade would then step forward and ask what was to be done with the religious people of the country. We would then quote what Comrade Lunacharsky had declared, namely, "We hate Christians. Even the best of them must be regarded as our worst enemies. All religions are poison. A fight to the death must be declared upon all religions." This is no idle dream. The Communist Party is working methodically and with deliberate precision toward this objective. It can happen here unless we destroy the Red Menace in America. The day is at hand when we shall suffer the same fate as our brethren in Europe. Detroit was another victim of the insurrectionists. More than $1 billion worth of damage was the final tabulation for their disorders. 20 years ago, few people would believe that Americans could be enticed into mass rioting and murders. Mobs fomenting hatred, throwing firebombs, beating and knifing any innocent bystander, or shooting every pedestrian who walked down the street were to be seen. It seems as though a large segment of the whole nation has become sold on the idea that a major internal revolution is the only answer for America's problems. Violence preachers, insurrectionists, and traitors are being countenanced every day in this country. The subversive elements within our own borders are fast becoming more terrible than the military forces of all our enemies. If the enemies of this nation would drop bombs on one of our metropolitan cities and inflict $1 billion worth of destruction, it would mean war. Yet, we have witnessed this very thing happen, and we tolerate it without giving it more than a passing thought a week after it happens. Fire and looting are not the only objectives of the rioters. Leading citizens and police are also targets for communist rifles and bombs. Riots, insurrection, and wholesale destruction are the preparations for the last phase of a national revolution. The following pictures and articles should leave an indelible impression upon the minds of every concerned American. Picture of burned out neighborhood with caption, "It looked like a city that had been bombed," said Michigan's Governor George Romney, after a helicopter flight of inspection. This burned out area along Philadelphia Avenue, a residential section of relatively prosperous Negro homes, was destroyed when flames set by looters in nearby 12th Street stores spread out of control. Picture of riots and police. Black extremists plot mass murder of government officials. At this very moment, even while you read this, fanatical ghetto guerrillas are circulating plans to liquidate the mayors, chiefs of police, city councilmen, and moderate Negro leaders in dozens of cities across the U.S. If this timetable of terror called Operation Giap, after Vuong Nguyen Giap, North Vietnam's legendary jungle tactician, is set in motion, it could be the bloodiest, wholesale political massacre in our nation's history. Editor's note: Roy Norton is one of the first white men to penetrate the explosive world of the black extremist underground. In early 1968, the 28-year-old magazine journalist passed himself off as a militant leftist and succeeded in gaining entry into the shadowy world of Negro extremists. The most militant black nationalists are planning G04 broke urban guerrilla warfare against this nation, Norton declared. The entire nation is the target. Cuba, Red China, and several other hostile countries are financing these groups. Unless these plans are thwarted, we can expect to see entire communities beset by sniping, sabotage, and other elements of guerrilla warfare. One of the most bizarre elements in their plot is the battle plan to assassinate government officials, Norton stated. The plan calls for the wholesale assassination of government officials throughout the United States. Victims of the incredible plot are local government officials in major cities. Maps, instructions on security weaknesses, and information on the location of the homes, families, and habits of mayors, chiefs of police, and other lawmen are now circulating through the extremist underground. The plot calls for these murders to be committed in the bloody, deadly mutilate and kill methods used by Mau Mau terrorists against the British in Kenya, Africa. Power plants, police stations, and other local government facilities are being mapped for possible sabotage in the future. FBI Director confirms assassination plot. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover addressed the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence on September 18, 1968, and told of the existence of a widespread assassination plot against local government officials. Hoover said, delegates from several Negro colleges and universities attended a black student conference sponsored by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee (SNCC) and held in mid-April 1968 in a southern state. Reportedly, the majority of men and women at this conference were armed with pistols. Among the items discussed at a DEFENSE workshop at this conference were the following: preparation of maps showing the locations of the homes of mayors, chiefs of police, and similar authorities, so they can be eliminated by Mau Mau tactics. Hoover also warned that foreign governments that are hostile to the U.S. are backing extremist black militants. Within the past year, there have been sufficient contacts between militant black nationalists and representatives of unfriendly or hostile countries to indicate a degree of foreign involvement, participation, and influence in the activities of black extremists in the United States. These foreign contacts serve to increase the potential for violence by giving inspiration, encouragement, and support to the revolutionary aims, doctrines, and activities of black extremists in this country. The plundering and looting of a city has very serious power structures, which could result in the plundering and looting of the entire nation. The communist influence is cleverly injected into civil disobedience and reprisals against our economic, political, and social system. 1. Edgar Hoover, FBI Law Enforcement Bull, February 1966. A special grand jury report on the riots in Cleveland, Ohio, reported that this jury finds that the outbreak of lawlessness and disorder was both organized, precipitated, and exploited by a relatively small group of trained and disciplined professionals at this business. They were aided and abetted, wittingly or otherwise, by misguided people of all ages and colors, many of whom are avowed believers in violence and extremism, and some of whom also are either members of or officers in the Communist Party. It is no casual happenstance or coincidence that those throwing firebombs, or bricks, or bottles, or pillaging, or generally engaged in disorder and lawlessness were in the main young people obviously assigned, trained, and disciplined in the roles they were to play. Nor it is happenstance or even just singular coincidence. 1. That the overall pattern for firebombing and destruction was so highly selective. 2. That the targets were plainly agreed upon. 3. That certain places were identified to be hit, and that certain other places were similarly spared. Few people could believe that revolt and insurrection could occur within the very capital of the United States. If such violence can occur in Washington, D.C., then no city in America is safe from destruction. The Dan Smoot Report. Vol. 14, Number 18, Broadcast 662, April 29, 1968, Dallas, Texas. The Sacking and Burning of Washington. The night Martin Luther King was murdered in Memphis, Thursday, April 4, 1968. Stokely Carmichael was in Washington, D.C. Within a few minutes after the news was out, Carmichael was leading a small gang of Negroes up and down the streets, storming into stores, ordering the places closed in honor of King, forcing customers and employees to leave. The gang grew larger and more violent, began smashing windows and looting stores. Negro mobs formed throughout the Negro business district of Washington, and by 9 p.m. the sacking and burning of the Capitol had begun. Carmichael slipped away and disappeared from the streets. All night Negro mobs burned, looted, and robbed, assaulted, murdered, and threatened wholesale slaughter. Scores of whites, including police and firemen, were beaten, hit by rocks, bottles, clubs. Some were kicked and dragged by gangs of howling young Negroes. Whites were pulled from their cars and stomped in the streets. Motorcycle officers were hauled from their vehicles, stoned and mauled. Police in cruising cars and firemen trying to get to fires were targets. One white man stopping at a filling station to get directions was clubbed, beaten, and stabbed to death. The violence subsided about 4 a.m. Friday, April 5. A few hours later, city and federal officials were meeting with Army people at the Pentagon to discuss the calling out of troops. They decided there was no need for troops. Early Friday morning, controversy arose in the district over the question of whether Stokely Carmichael had had anything to do with causing the Thursday night riot. Carmichael obligingly cleared up that point. He called a press conference Friday morning to announce that he had started the riot and had led the first gang of vandals and looters. Carmichael said, "Let me make clear what happened last night. Last night we led all of those youngsters up and down the street to close the stores in memory of Dr. King. Some of them began kicking in store. We weren't stopping them from kicking in a few windows. We were stopping them from coming out on the streets without guns. When they come out on the streets, we want them to have guns. The only way to survive is to get some guns." 1. Carmichael also gave an interview via long-distance telephone to Radio Havana, Communist Cuba's major broadcast facility. In the interview, which was broadcast in English, Carmichael said, "It is crystal clear to us that the United States of America must fall in order for humanity to live, and we are going to give our lives for that cause. More people are now beginning to plan seriously a major urban guerrilla warfare, where we can begin to retaliate not only for the death of Dr. King, but where we can move seriously with this country to bring it to its knees." 2. In closing, Carmichael sent his regards to the brothers and sisters in Cuba, especially Fidel Castro. Shortly after his press conference and interview with Radio Havana on Friday morning, April 5, Carmichael joined a crowd of some 200 Negro students gathered at Howard University under pretext of holding memorial services for Martin Luther King. Carmichael spoke to the mob, brandishing a gun above his head, urging Negroes to arm themselves and kill whites. The rally broke up, and the 200 Negro students headed for downtown Washington to loot and burn, smashing windshields and windows, stoning cars and white occupants on the way. Officials meeting in the Pentagon began to get scattered reports of looting about 9 a.m. Friday. They did nothing. By 1 p.m. Friday, reports of arson and looting were coming in from all sections. Officials ordered the D.C. National Guard to assemble for drill. By 2:30 p.m. Friday, marauding Negroes were converging on the downtown area from all directions. Police tried in vain to hold them back. Giving way before the mobs, police fell back and watched the looting and burning. Occasionally, a gang of Negroes would haul some white person out of a car and beat him. The Negroes stole everything they could get their hands on, from cough drops to grand pianos. A looting pattern had developed. A small group of Negroes would smash in a storefront to the mad cheers of the mob. When the police did nothing, looters would storm into the store, with more yelling and wild cheering. Well-dressed Negroes would arrive in late-model cars, and the store would be stripped. When the store was emptied, a gasoline-soaked torch would be thrown in to fire it, and another wild cheer would rend the air. Stores owned by Negroes were, for the most part, untouched. They were identified with soul signs or with pictures of Martin Luther King, bearing the caption "Our Militant Leader." A regular Washington policeman said, "I think we could have stopped this thing if they hadn't put us under wraps." So, looters would break a window, then stand aside to watch our reaction. When we did nothing, the mob would move in and ransack the place. We just had to stand there. 3. One white merchant helplessly watched Negro hoodlums ransack his liquor store, guzzling the stolen whiskey on the sidewalk in the presence of police, smashing the empty bottles through windows or against passing police cars or fire equipment. The merchant asked a police officer standing idly by to stop them. The policeman said he had to wait for orders. 4. Negro gangs looted and burned within 2 blocks of the White House. All up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, from the White House to the Capitol, stores were hit. Shoppers and employees in big department stores screamed in terror as Negro gangs smashed windows and swarmed in looting, mauling, threatening, and shouting obscenities at whites. Negro teenagers carrying stolen goods ran in front of the White House taunting police and guards, sneering, "Why don't you shoot us?" At 4:03 p.m. Friday, April 5, President Johnson, at the request of the Negro mayor of Washington, finally ordered troops into the city. But by then, the capital of the United States was already paralyzed and burning. Traffic jams, resulting from terrified whites trying to flee the district, made vehicular movement on most streets impossible. Hundreds of fires raged out of control in many areas. Fire equipment could not get to the fires. When they could move, they were under such heavy attack from Negroes throwing bottles, rocks, and bricks that they had to withdraw and wait for police protection. The police, still under orders not to use their weapons, had been told to ignore looting and arson and to concentrate on protecting firemen. Even this role they could not perform, because they too were under attack and fell back under orders to avoid the necessity of using force against the mobs. So Washington burned. Streets were so clogged with abandoned loot, collapsed buildings, and stalled traffic that National Guard and Army troops, ordered out at 4:03 p.m. Friday, were not substantially deployed in the city until Saturday morning, and they moved in with unloaded guns. They, like the police, were ordered to ignore arsonists and looters. The first troops to arrive set up machine guns around the White House and the Capitol. Johnson, hoping to give minimum offense to Negro rioters, ordered the machine gunners to conceal themselves behind shrubbery. The White House, the Capitol, and the home of the mayor of Washington were protected. Elsewhere, where Negro mobs were permitted to assault, loot, and burn almost at will even after troops arrived, many reporters took refuge at the White House, considering it the only safe place in town. The mayor proclaimed a curfew, effective at 4 p.m. Friday, but it did little good. Gangs of young Negro men swaggered down the streets threatening, frightening, or molesting whites, stealing whatever they pleased. Negro women walked through downtown Washington carrying sacks of rocks to throw at police, firemen, white civilians, and store windows. Police stopped Stokely Carmichael strolling through a riot section in violation of the curfew. He told them he did not know the curfew was in effect, and they let him go his way. By Saturday night, April 6, some 14,000 troops and policemen were deployed in Washington. Still under orders not to shoot, they were eventually permitted to use tear gas, and by late Saturday afternoon, they were making thousands of arrests. Sunday morning, April 7, many parts of Washington looked like a city leveled by enemy bombers. Whole blocks of buildings were burned out shells. Hundreds of people were homeless. Many small businessmen had lost everything they had, and their employees were jobless. 7 persons were known to be dead, but for days after the riots ended, bodies were being found in burned buildings. Not until Friday, April 12, 8 days after rioting began, did the mayor of Washington broadcast that all was clear, and the troops were leaving. By then, 645 buildings, 283 housing units, 209 commercial establishments, and 8 public or institutional establishments were listed as damaged or totally destroyed. The building damage alone in Washington was estimated at $13.3 million. No estimate has been made of loss resulting from burning and looting of the contents of buildings, personal and commercial property, equipment, fixtures, machinery, and so on. 5. Injured treated at hospitals during the riots totaled 1167 persons arrested, exclusive of juveniles, totaled 7364. Approximately 10% of all those arrested were employees of regular agencies of the federal government. This does not include an unknown number of persons drawing salaries from poverty war agencies financed with tax money by the federal government. There was no indication that any of the arrested government employees would lose their jobs. It seemed fairly certain that those charged felonies would be handled, if at all, on charges reduced to misdemeanors. A 1966 law makes it a felony punishable by 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine for anyone in the district to incite or urge a riot that results in personal injuries or property damage of $5,000 or more. Yet, nothing has been done about Stokely Carmichael. The D.C. Public Safety Director says the matter is under investigation. But it is known in Washington that Attorney General Ramsey Clark does not want to prosecute Carmichael. 6. Clark helped devise the humanitarian technique of riot containment used in Washington. He has congratulated troops and police for the restraint that enabled them eventually to contain the riot without doing much harm to rioters. He hopes the technique will be used in other cities hit by Negro riots. Washington officials claim that police and military restraint saved Washington from a bloodbath. 7. Whose blood was spared? The blood of the arsonist, vandals, thieves, and assorted thugs who destroyed the homes and businesses of others caused an unknown number of deaths and injured more than 1,000. If Washington's streets had been bathed with the blood of some of the savages who sacked the city, it is most unlikely that Washington would have another riot. If it were known that maximum deadly force would be used against rioters in all cities, rioting would stop. Panicking in the face of mob violence, the House of Representatives on April 10 passed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which contains an open housing section, eliminating the right of people to manage and control their own property. Now, the Reverend A.D. King announcing that he will carry out the plans of his communist-fronting dead brother to lead a poor people's march on Washington this spring and summer. Say, we are going to Washington not to request and not to demand, but to command the Congress to do something. In the past we have asked for crumbs, but now we are asking for the whole loaf. 8. If we do not vote out of office every member of Congress who supports or yields to the outrageous demands of Negro agitators, our nation is doomed. Anarchy is growing at such a pace that we may not have another chance if we do not turn the rascals out this year. For that reason, I urge all of you to get and pass on to others copies of our comprehensive 28-page record of the 90th Congress, which shows how every member of Congress stands on civil rights and poverty war measures which encourage and reward the militants, agitators, and hoodlums who are destroying our civilization. Footnotes. 1. Killing stirs looting in part of D.C. The Wash, D.C. Evening Star, April 5, 1968 pages. A1, 7. 2. Article by Jeremiah O'Leary. The Wash, D.C. Evening Star, April 12, 1968 PA 9. 3. U.S. News and World Report, April 22, 1968, page 33. 4. Special Report. We don't have a business. The Wash, D.C. Sunday Star, April 14, 1968 PA 8. 5. AP Article, The Dallas Morning News, April 13, 1968 PA 10. 6. Article by Roland Evans and Robert Nierk, The Dallas Times-Herald, April 22, 1968 PA 20. 7. Article by John Fizelka, The Wash, D.C., Evening Star, April 12, 1968 pages, A1, 6. 8 quotes in the news. The Dallas Times Herald, April 22, 1968 PA2. Communist crusaders are at our doorsteps. They have an objective and they live and breathe to fulfill that goal. Americans can shrug off any thought of a revolution, as most of them do. But the insurrectionists have not lost any ground in their final diabolical mission. They now freely speak of it, they publish it, and they have demonstrated it in the ashes of our cities. Robert Williams, who fled from the United States to avoid prosecution, wrote a pamphlet entitled The Crusader. The publication was published by him in Cuba and then distributed around the USA. The Crusader, monthly newsletter. Robert F. Williams, publisher in exile. Vol. 5 No. 4 May-June 1964, USA. The potential of a minority revolution. When the brutally oppressed Afro-American speaks of violent resistance to savage racial dehumanization, he reaps a whirlwind of reasons and causes why such a reaction supposedly is insane and suicidal. There is no end to the stereotyped polemics and heated opposition that beckloads a rational and objective discourse on the subject. From the camps of the rabid white supremacy power structure, the fellow traveling white liberal and the mercenary running dog Uncle Tom, any individual who raises such a question is labeled a bloodthirsty crackpot, not worthy of social acceptance in America's democratic and Christian society. Proponents of the peaceful transition philosophy are quick to evoke the Gandhian theory of appealing to the conscience of the brutal oppressor and conquering him with the power of nonviolence and love. Let them remember that the anti-racist, anti-imperialist forces of the socialist camp are growing more powerful every day. We are learning from the people of Vietnam. We are learning from the people of Cuba. We are learning from the people of Algeria, Angola, and the Congo. This year 1964 is going to be a violent one. The storm will reach hurricane proportions by 1965, and the eye of the hurricane will hover over America by 1966. America is a house on fire. Let it burn, let it burn. The Monroe explosion came prematurely because of our shift in emphasis from self-defense to publicly overemphasizing nonviolence. A 6-year effective campaign terminated an ill-fated, untimely experiment with nonviolence. We had enough force and arms to reduce the city to ashes. The white supremacy masses must be forced to retreat to their homes in order to give security to their individual families. Gasoline firebombs, Molotov cocktails, lye or acid bombs, made by injecting lye or acid in the metal end of light bulbs, can be used extensively. During the night hours, such weapons thrown from rooftops will make the streets impossible for racist cops to patrol. Hand grenades, bazookas, light mortars, rocket launchers, machine guns and ammunition can be bought clandestinely from servicemen anxious to make a fast dollar. Gas tanks on public vehicles can be choked up with sand. Sugar is also highly effective in gasoline lines. Long nails driven through boards and tacks with large heads are effective to slow the movement of traffic on congested roads at night. This can cause havoc on turnpikes. Derailing of trains causes panic. Explosive booby traps on police telephone boxes can be employed. High-powered sniper rifles are readily available. Armor-piercing bullets will penetrate oil storage tanks from a distance. Phosphorus matches, kitchen matches placed in air conditioning systems will cause delayed explosions which will destroy expensive buildings. Flamethrowers can be manufactured at home. Yes, the US government has sunken to the level of devil of the world. The same racist savages whose bombs blow the heads off black babies in Birmingham, USA, who viciously club pregnant Afro-American women into insensibility on the streets of America, are the same beasts who murder, torture and maim the patriots of Vietnam. It is the height of man's inhumanity to man when a slave is sent to extend his master's brutal slavery to his brothers. Afro-American soldiers themselves are being slaughtered like wild beasts on the streets of the so-called free world of racist America, yet they are being sent as aggressors against the anti-racist, anti-imperialist peace-loving people of Vietnam in a fraudulent crusade of containing communism. Throughout racist America, our people are being terrorized, murdered, maimed, bombed, lynched, raped, starved, sterilized by the states and imprisoned. Our people have reached a new revolutionary fervor. Our method of struggle is fast developing in the nature that oppressive besets understand and respect. Not only does freedom require the will to die, but it also requires the will to kill. We believe in the right of armed struggle. We believe in the people's right to defend themselves in Vietnam as well as in Harlem, New York or Jackson, Mississippi, USA. We proudly hail the nuclear achievements of the staunch defenders of the oppressed, our Chinese brothers, in developing weapons for self-defense against nuclear intimidation by the racist USA. are people who have for many generations been defenseless victims of monopolized white supremacy terror. Consider the Chinese bomb, a people's bomb, a freedom bomb of the oppressed. Our principles, our love for humanity, demand that we place ourselves on the aid of the Vietnamese people. As a representative of the Revolutionary Action Movement, I am here to give support to the Vietnamese people in their struggle against U.S. imperialist aggression. We are opposed to the barbaric acts of the hypocritical Johnson administration at home and abroad. Our human decency will not allow us to predify and serve as spineless apologists for savage Yankeeism. Not only do we condemn, protest and raise our fists in indignation, the streets of America, and we shall set the last great stronghold of Yankee imperialism ablaze with our battle cry of freedom. Freedom, freedom now or death. The Johnson administration is a racist, imperialist administration, desperately trying to conceal its inherent dishonor in a deceptive cloak of so-called representative democracy. Wherever it can, it thrusts its imperialism deceptively upon the deceived through phony aliases for progress, Peace Corps, aid programs, military pacts, phony democratic slogans, Yankee dollars and chewing gum. Wherever it can, it hides its brutal and evil racist face behind the clever facade of mercenary Negroes. It stages a repulsive parade of hand-picked Negro puppets, Judases and apologists for the system before the world to extol the virtues of a fabled representative democracy for a government that respects the human rights of colored people less than those of common street dogs. Every family in America must have a copy of this communist document of strategy for civil war. If every American would read it, the fight would soon be won. Notice this brochure. It's printed in Cuba by Robert F. Williams, a communist who fled the U.S. to avoid kidnapping arrest. It is being sent to Canada, where it is remailed to communist distribution points in the U.S. for dissemination to NAACP, core and Muslim groups. Tens of thousands were distributed in the Watts area before the uprising. Inform your fellow Americans about the communist-directed racial disorders in our nation and its base of operation. Order copies from Soldiers of the Cross, Box 116, Englewood, Colo, published in Cuba as a private publication. Political and international policies are all to be maneuvered or controlled into communist programs. Although revolution is becoming a national reality, the vast armies and sabotagers are to take a part in a total war to overcome all opposition. Dmitry Z. Manulsky, in a speech before the Lenin School of Political Warfare in 1930, said, "War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 20 or 30 years. To win, we will need the element of surprise. The bourgeois will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There will be electrifying overtures and unheard of concessions. The capitalistic countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to our friends. As soon as their guard is down, we shall smash them with our clenched fist." Patterns of Communist Espionage. Committee on Un-American Activities, 85th Congress, January 1959, page 1. This Dmitry was one of the representatives to the United Nations for bringing peace to the world. Well-informed people are aware of the communist plot to destroy America. Dr. Fred Schwartz wrote, "When they have Eastern Europe, Asia and Africa, then and then only, they will overrun Western Europe. This may be accomplished by telephone, or it may need a little action, but with all Asia and Africa gone, Western Europe will have little will to fight. The world would then be divided into two hemispheres, one with 2,000 million, the other with 300 million. You can imagine what would happen then. After he has the whole of Europe, Africa and Asia, he will unleash up to 1 million aircraft against this country. From the north, from the south, from the west and from the east they will converge, manned by suicide pilots with no expectation of returning, and they will devastate this country within a few days." Communist Interpretation of Peace, page 17. Two other quotes follow, showing the awareness of some in regard to communist programs. Soviet Russia is growing in strength each day, General Sasha Korotkov boasted. "When the time is ripe we will strike, comrade. In one day we will wipe out all the American war bases from Spain to Alaska." He drew in his breath sharply and added, "And on the very same day the 100 most important Americans will die. Some of them will be poisoned, some crushed under falling rocks, some in unavoidable automobile accidents. The sooner these American exploiters, these bloodsuckers of the poor, are liquidated, the better. My 10 years as a counterspy." Boris Moroz. Russia is the shining example of a small, well-organized group taking over a country, and the lessons have succeeded in China and the Balkans. Four conceptions using the school's phraseology for an insurrection are preparation, timing, knowledge of tactics, and complete surprise. Though loyal to the communist world capital and well instructed, the local leaders still will be amateurs, and Moscow prefers to send experienced revolutionaries to take charge and avoid disastrous bungling and over-leniency. Like the party policies and the life of a party member, nothing is left to chance or to personal vagaries, but is planned in advance on party principles and experience. High points in the plan for the capture of Chicago when the time comes sound like an army operation, with everything provided for from psychological warfare to dropping paratroopers. The peaceful preparations go on for years through capable party members burrowed into trade unions, public offices, police forces, liberal clubs, and other sources of information. Vital spots such as power plants, radio stations, and airports must be mapped. All the working masses and unorganized proletariat may not be aroused to join in the fracas, but the needed knowledge of where to attack to paralyze the city will be at hand. Even recording such a small detail as whether a watchman has a dog is called for in the instructions. A headquarters, known only to a selected few, will be set up, a courier system organized, telephone talks will be in code, party papers or names memorized and destroyed. Until the 0 hour, non-party friends should be used as blinds and communications written on borrowed typewriters. Police forces are notoriously unreliable for insurrections. Consequently, the city's riot squad sure to put up a fight is studied. If it is on 3 shifts, the weakest one is picked for the attack. Once the police officers are alert to what is brewing, the advice is to telephone them on a phony pretext to learn whether they are home or on duty. The habits and daily routine of the chief must be learned. A blacklist is to be prepared of politically undesirable citizens for summary liquidation or temporary use, while their families are held as hostages. Squads are assigned to capture each objective. Getting names is easy in the United States. The hour and minute when the groups will strike simultaneously will be the final instructions. To prevent calls for outside help, communications will be interrupted immediately. Railroads are to be wrecked several miles outside the city, either by sending out maverick locomotives or by blowing up incoming trains. Armed men will hold the airports. Captured radio stations will order a general strike, which will be easy if the power plants are seized. The mayor, chief of police, and other officers and leaders are to be captured early. If the mayor refuses to read the proclamation which must be prepared for him, he can be disposed of on the spot, and somebody with a similar voice, already selected, can read it. According to the time schedule, a city like Chicago should be captured in less than 48 hours. By that time, the insurrectionists will have all the weapons and can arm more supporters. They are to proceed to setting up the government from officials picked in advance. Prepare for the storm, page 29 to 30. By William Colgren. 3 Manhattan skyscrapers ripped by powerful bombs. New York, UPI. Powerful bombs ripped through the offices of major corporations in 3 mid-Manhattan skyscrapers early today, shattering walls, windows, and plumbing. The circumstances and results of the bombings were very similar to another triple bombing last November 11 that hit other offices in Manhattan, a police official said. A typewritten message taking credit for the bombings was delivered to United Press International by special delivery mail shortly after 7 a.m. It was signed Revolutionary Force 9. The message read, "In death-directed America there is only one way to a life of love and freedom, to attack and destroy the forces of death and exploitation, and to build a just society revolution." Deseret News, front page, March 12, 1970. Body, bomb fragments found. New York, UPI. Pieces of human bodies and part of a bomb mechanism were found Sunday in the rubble of a Greenwich Village townhouse demolished 10 days ago by dynamite blasts. Newsweek magazine reported Sunday the explosives that leveled the building police have called a bomb factory were to have been used by radicals to bomb Columbia University and other buildings. Newsweek magazine reported Sunday about a dozen young radicals were in the house plotting to bomb Columbia and other buildings when the dynamite exploded. Newsweek said they had come to New York from Boston, Chicago, and elsewhere. It said they planned bombings to pressure Columbia into providing bail money for 12 of 13 Black Panthers on trial here now for another bomb plot. Deseret News, page 2A, March 16, 1970. These new revolutionary tools are a little more difficult to operate than the former mimeograph machines. Bombings linked? Copley News Service. Washington. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee will investigate links between Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba and the wave of violence and bombings in the United States. Chairman James Eastland, D-Miss, has charged that nearly 1,000 youths who have visited Cuba in recent months ostensibly to help cut that island's sugarcane have been indoctrinated and trained to attack and destroy our institutions and our government. 2 radical leaders killed recently with 3 others in the apparently accidental explosion of homemade bombs in New York City and Maryland had visited Cuba, Eastland told the Senate this week. He also said many of the leaders of the hippie and anti-Vietnam movements have been guests of the Castro government. He cited Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger and Tom Hayden of the CHICAG07, Mark Rudd, a leader in Columbia University's Riots, Kathy Boudin and Catherine Wilkerson, who were named as participants in the Chicago riots, Yvonne Bond, listed as a leader in the Berkeley riots, and Robert Collier, convicted for his role in attempting to blow up the Statue of Liberty and indicted on other similar counts in New York. Theodore Gold and Ralph Featherstone, victims of New York and Maryland bomb explosions, also had visited Cuba. Featherstone and a companion were killed when a bomb went off in their car near Bel Air, Maryland, scene of H. Rap Brown's riot trial. Gold and 2 others were killed when dynamite exploded in the basement laboratory of a New York townhouse. What a whirlwind we have reaped from their visits to Cuba, Eastland said. Ponder the dark and bloody results which could flow from 1,000 of these people, spread like a stain across our land. Deseret News, Wednesday, March 18, 1970. America was alerted over 25 years ago. 1. In 1926, R.M. Whitney wrote a book which exposed the Red Plot in all its major ramifications. It was profusely illustrated with documents seized from communist sources by federal authorities. The most colossal conspiracy against the United States in its history was unearthed at Bridgman, Michigan, August 22, 1922, when the secret convention of the Communist Party of America was raided by the Michigan Constabulary, aided by county and federal officials. 2 barrels full of documentary proof of the conspiracy were seized and are in possession of the authorities. Names, records, checks from prominent people in this country, instructions from Moscow, speeches, theses, questionnaires, indeed, the whole machinery of the underground organization, the avowed aim of which is the overthrow of the United States government, was found in such shape as to condemn every participant in the convention. It is now known and can be made public to what extent this movement, inspired from Moscow and directed by Lenin and Trotsky, has grown since the first seeds were sown a few years ago. 2. The following racial program was read to a meeting of assembled communist leaders in Bridgman, Michigan, on August 20, 1922. The Reds proceeded with this program in spite of exposure and have accomplished practically all of their objectives. Today we see the tragic effects of public and official indifference. Communist stump preaching and red mimeographing are now operating on larger scales in the United States. Sign carrying and philosophical debates are being replaced by Molotov cocktails and high explosives. The number of communists in America has reached a sufficient force for national destruction. Fires and bombs are spreading the final messages of communism in America.